pages turn to gray, secrets locked away, chasing down the ghosts of a yesterday, uncovering the names from history's forgotten days. The real truth is in the records we ignite, forgotten history.
In 1977, one single film didn't just entertain audiences, it completely dismantled and rebuilt the entire global film industry. Welcome to this explainer on the cinematic paradigm shift of Star Wars. You know, it's so easy to look back now, from our modern era of endless mega franchises, and just assume this space fantasy was a guaranteed hit. But honestly, it was a massive, unprecedented gamble that permanently rewrote the rules of visual effects, sound design, and Hollywood economics.
To really grasp the impact of this, we have to drop right into the mindset of that era. Expectations were incredibly low. Even its creator, George Lucas, kind of expected it to fail. Get this, Steven Spielberg was literally the only person who accurately predicted its monumental success. He told a room full of industry insiders that it would be the biggest movie of all time, and they just laughed right in his face. No, seriously, they actually laughed at him.
So let's dive into Act 1, the pre-1977 landscape.
The 1970s was the absolute heart of the new Hollywood movement. Cinema was totally dominated by gritty realism, crime, anti-heroes, and really deep internal character studies. Think of massive hits like The Godfather or The Exorcist. They were grounded, cynical, and relatively small in scale. Well, Lucas pivoted violently away from that. He pitched an earnest space fantasy heavily inspired by classic mythology. It was a straightforward hero's journey, a timeless external battle of good versus evil.
Because of that stark contrast, this wholesome adventure was seen as totally unmarketable. Lucas shopped around a 13-page treatment called The Star Wars and faced almost universal rejection. Even Disney passed on it. It wasn't until Lucas commissioned some incredible concept art to actually visualize this crazy universe that 20th Century Fox finally took the gamble, fronting an $8 million budget for a completely unproven space opera. It really goes to show that some of the biggest industry game changers start as ideas nobody else believes in.
Moving right along to Act 2, the ILM Revolution. Here's the thing. To make this movie, Lucas couldn't just rent some equipment. After finding out that Fox had completely shut down its in-house visual effects department, he had to build an entirely new company just to invent the tools to film it. Enter Industrial Light and Magic, or ILM. Before 1977, special effects really hadn't seen a major leap forward since the 1950s. ILM was created to fill that massive void and pioneer the exact cinematic technologies needed to realize a galaxy far, far away. And the sheer handcrafted ingenuity of this team is legendary. Special effects supervisor John Dykstra famously noted that they literally walked into an empty warehouse, sat on the floor, and just figured out how to invent the modern visual effects industry from scratch. It's wild to think that this scrappy, empty warehouse team would go on to work on over 300 films and take home 15 Academy Awards over their history.
Their technical process was painstakingly meticulous. Remember, there's no CGI yet. First, they built intricately detailed practical miniatures and filmed them against blue screens. To capture those dynamic, high-octane dogfights, ILM developed the Dykstraflex. This was a computer-controlled camera rig that allowed for the exact, precise repetition of camera movements. Because they could repeat the move perfectly, they could film multiple passes of the models and seamlessly composite them together using optical printing. It was an absolute breakthrough.
But it wasn't just about cool spaceships. They grounded all these fantastical elements with a really tangible, lived-in production design. Everything in this universe felt dirty, used, and real. And for the iconic weaponry, they used rotoscoping, painstakingly animating directly over the film footage to transform physical glowing sticks into lightsabers, which are arguably the most iconic cinematic weapons in history.
Which brings us to Act 3, a groundbreaking sonic shift.
You know, visual effects are really only half the illusion. Sound designer Ben Burtt fundamentally rejected the weird electronic synthesizers that were the sci-fi standard in the 70s. Instead, he engineered an entirely organic sound design by combining real-world audio. He manipulated animal growls, high-tension wires, and heavy scuba breathing to create a completely immersive sonic environment. The hum of a lightsaber, the howl of a TIE fighter, those distinctive beeps from R2-D2, or the menacing breathing of Darth Vader. These sounds are totally alien, yet deeply grounded in our physical reality. And to make sure audiences actually felt this audio, the film championed the widespread adoption of Dolby Stereo, completely changing how theaters tracked and played sound forever.
Then you have composer John Williams. George Lucas himself admitted the score was one of the only aspects of the film to actually exceed his expectations. Williams tossed out the bizarre experimental sci-fi tones of the era, opting for a huge, classical, romantic, orchestral score. It brought this profound emotional weight back to cinema. The Imperial March, the Rebel fanfare, these didn't just support the film, they became massive cultural phenomenons all on their own.
And finally, Act 4, the business paradigm shift.
This is where a single contract negotiation completely rewrote the economics of Hollywood. Coming off his previous hit, American Graffiti, George Lucas entered renegotiations. But instead of demanding a huge salary bump, he actually took a $500,000 pay cut. He sacrificed that immediate cash for one highly specific condition, retaining the licensing rights to produce sequels and merchandise.
At the time, the studio thought he was crazy. It was viewed as a huge, unnecessary risk. But that bold sacrifice eventually transformed into a staggering $20 billion. Yeah, billion with a B. Between 1977 and 2012 alone, consumer merchandise generated over $20 billion in revenue, completely dwarfing the net gross of the actual films. Lucas realized way before anyone else that this wasn't just a movie. It was an experience you could take home in the form of action figures and toys.
This literally birthed a permanent after-state for the film industry. Before 1977, the focus was mostly on standalone films. The primary revenue was just box office ticket sales, and the power dynamic largely favored the independent filmmaker. But post-1977, the entire industry completely shifted. Studios suddenly pivoted all their focus to highly commercial, merchandise-driven event films. They realized that continuing a pre-existing story basically does half the marketing work for you. This moved the power away from independent auteurs and placed it firmly into the hands of studio-dominated franchise machines.
The permanent footprint of Lucas's creation is just staggering. 1977 birthed the modern blockbuster with A New Hope. Then by 1980, The Empire Strikes Back sets the exact framework for the modern sequel. You bring back the same heroes, the same villains, you expand the universe, and you leave the audience dangling on a massive cliffhanger. This expansive multimedia storytelling model paved the way for prequels, spin-offs, books, comics, ultimately leading to Disney acquiring the entire empire for $4 billion in 2012.
Which brings us to a final, provocative thought. This wasn't just a movie, it was a technological and economic earthquake. It proved that audiences desperately craved massive, immersive, relatable spectacles, and it handed studios the exact blueprint to monetize that craving. So if a 1977 space fantasy, built with practical miniatures by a scrappy team in an empty warehouse, defined the entire cinematic business model for the last 50 years, what on earth will be the next innovation to finally rewrite the rules all over again? Thanks for watching this explainer. Keep exploring.